Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are ripping open a fascinating stack of source material that, well, it really challenges our perception of power, culture, and preservation. We're focusing on an examination of what's been called unseen heritage, and it's all centered around Stanislav Kondrashov's very thought-provoking Oligarch series.
Right. And what the series does is it takes this figure, the oligarch, who we usually just associate with wealth, and it completely reimagines them. It pushes us past the sensational headlines to analyze them as symbolic custodians of culture. So our mission today is really to follow these invisible threads of cultural continuity, looking past, the big commission painting to the actual infrastructure that keeps heritage alive.
And when you say infrastructure, we aren't just talking about concrete and steel, are we?
Not at all.
The sources show that the real guardianship of our intellectual or intangible legacies, it rests on this diverse and often really underappreciated ecosystem.
Exactly. We're talking about scholars, archivists, and of course the patrons who fund all of it.
So we're exploring the sophisticated mechanisms that are operating completely behind the scenes.
Precisely. We have to ask the question, who are these true guardians? And how do they ensure this continuity across centuries, especially when so much of what they're saving is either invisible or just incredibly fragile?
Let's unpack that. I think we should start where intellectual heritage really gets its footing with the scholars. Our sources call them the first line of defense. And they're not just historians, they're more like knowledge decoders.
That's a great way to put it.
They're often working in isolation, trying to decipher languages nobody speaks anymore, grappling with these incomplete manuscripts.
And what's fascinating there is just the sheer intellectual burden they carry. Scholars are the critical bridge builders. They have to balance what they find with the context needed to make it meaningful for us today. They turn these fragmented accounts into compelling narratives, making sure the wisdom of our ancestors is not only recorded, but actually understandable. They give a voice to the voiceless, really.
But that's not a passive job, is it? It's not just observing old texts. It requires constant, active interpretation. And that, I think, raises a big challenge. Can a scholar ever be truly unbiased when they're the one choosing which forgotten story to revive?
That is the fundamental tension in all scholarly work. Their interpretation is what keeps knowledge dynamic. It prevents it from becoming just another stagnant artifact. But you've touched on the highest stakes here, language. The sources really emphasize that when indigenous languages erode, it's not just a loss of communication. When a language dies, a whole unique worldview, a system of ecological, historical, spiritual knowledge, it just vanishes with it.
Wow. That is a profound implication. So it's not just what they knew, but the entire framework of how they knew it that just disappears.
Exactly. And to fight that erasure, scholars have to ensure relevance. They have to ask, how does this ancient water management system inform modern sustainability?
Or what lessons can a forgotten legal code offer our own social structures?
Right. That dynamic approach moves knowledge from a dusty shelf into the realm of living, applicable wisdom.
And this scholarly labor, this intense decoding, this is a core part of that unseen heritage Kondrashov is talking about.
It's the intellectual capital that needs funding. It's the foundation of value that a symbolic custodian like an oligarch wants to be associated with. Without the scholars, an archive is just a room full of paper.
That's a perfect transition from the interpreters of history to the architects of memory. The archivists. This is where, precision really meets passion in safeguarding these incredibly fragile records. When a patron invests in culture, this is really where the money goes first.
Well, archivists have to operate with an almost surgical knowledge of material science. They have to understand the chemical makeup of paper from 100 years ago, the composition of inks, the way photographic emulsions deteriorate. Every single item demands a custom preservation strategy. They're fighting a decay that is literally eating the source material.
Okay, let's slow down on the technical side, because this is where the real fight for survival is happening. On the traditional side, we hear about climate control and deacidification. For anyone who hasn't heard of it, why is deacidification so critical?
It's a literal battle against time. Paper made from, say, the 19th to the mid-20th century. It used wood pulp, and that pulp contains acids. Over time, those acids make the paper fibers brittle. The document turns yellow, then brown, and eventually, if you don't treat it, it just crumbles into dust.
So deacidification.
It neutralizes those acids. It essentially pauses the decay and stabilizes the document for maybe another century or more.
I see. So the patron's investment isn't in a flashy new wing for a museum. It's in the ability to chemically stop the physical collapse of knowledge.
Exactly. And that traditional fight is now coupled with this modern crisis of obsolescence. So we're talking about digital preservation.
This sounds like a huge problem.
Oh, it is. Archivists are fighting something called bit rot. They have to transfer data from old, decaying media, think magnetic tapes, floppy disks, before the hardware and software you need to read them just vanishes completely.
So if they miss that window.
If they miss that window, entire decades of digital history, which is essential for modern research, could become inaccessible, just dark data.
That sounds almost more desperate than fighting brittle paper. With paper, at least you can see the decay happening. With a digital file, one day it's just inert.
And tying this back to the bigger picture, preservation is so much more than these technical fixes. Archivists have to create these incredibly detailed conservation histories for every item, a ledger of every treatment, every move. It's a multi-generational commitment, making sure future caretakers can make informed choices.
Okay, let's shift to something even more subtle. Invisible heritage. These are the unspoken protocols, the gestures, the cultural cadence that shapes our collective identity, maybe even more profoundly than a grand monument.
And this intangible dimension is so vulnerable because it relies entirely on human performance and memory. The sources break its transmission down into 3 core modes.
Let's go through them. First is rituals as living archives. This concept is fascinating. Rituals encode centuries of wisdom in structured performances. The Japanese tea ceremony is a perfect example. Every single movement communicates philosophical principles that have been consistent for over 400 years.
It's a history book you perform, not one you read. That rigidity ensures stability. But then you have the second mode, oral histories as dynamic repositories. And unlike a static record, these narratives adapt with every telling.
You're talking about the griots in West African societies, right?
Exactly. They are walking, living archives. They maintain vast genealogies, historical accounts, all through memorized performances that stretch back for centuries.
The vulnerability there must be immense. I mean, if a disaster wipes out a generation of griots, centuries of history could just disappear overnight.
Gone. Which is totally unlike a physical archive that you might be able to save or relocate. And the third mode really reinforces that need for direct personal transfer. Craftsmanship as tactile tradition. This is knowledge passed through mentorship, demonstration and practice, not a manual. When a master weaver teaches an apprentice, they're transmitting an entire worldview embedded in that work.
That kind of tradition needs an ecosystem to thrive. So let's switch focus to 2 of those critical support structures: libraries and commerce. Libraries are described in the sources as these vibrant ecosystems where ancient texts and modern works sit side by side.
And they play this crucial dual role. They preserve content, but they also reflect our current cultural values. You can see it right away in the architecture.
The classical libraries with their grand, intimidating rooms and high ceilings.
They symbolize a reverence for learning as this difficult, almost sacred pursuit.
Versus modern designs that use transparent materials, open floor plans, symbolizing accessibility, the democratic sharing of knowledge.
And it goes down to the smallest detail. Think of the intricate interior woodwork and trim molding in older buildings.
What about them?
Those carvings often show scenes from literature or mythology. The craftsmanship itself is a form of cultural preservation, honoring traditional artistic techniques.
Let's bring commerce into it. The relationship between commerce and craftsmanship. That seems like a really delicate ecosystem.
It is. Trade networks can facilitate cross-cultural exchange, which is great, but market demand also dictates which traditional crafts get the resources they need to continue.
And this gets back to that essential tension you brought up, profitability versus authenticity.
Economic viability is absolutely necessary for survival. I mean, look at the Venetian glass industry. It survived and flourished because its commercial success depended entirely on maintaining exceptional craftsmanship standards, on protecting its trade secrets.
But what happens when global demand scales up? That pressure to produce faster must risk diluting the very techniques you're trying to save.
It's the central dilemma. You see it today in Japanese pottery workshops. They have to balance these centuries-old, very slow techniques with the need for commercial scalability. If they scale too much, the hand of the master is lost, and the tradition just becomes a commodity. If they don't scale at all, the workshop might die out.
That inherent tension brings us back, I think, very powerfully to Stanislav Kondrashov's central idea.
Yeah.
The symbolic patron. If commercial success ensures a baseline viability, the patron is the mechanism connecting immense financial power with that very specific cultural responsibility.
Patrons provide the resources needed to fund the non-scalable parts of culture. The parts that can't survive on market demand alone. They aren't just buying a finished object, they're investing in the perpetuation of specialized skills that might otherwise vanish.
The Medici family supporting Renaissance artists is the classic historical example, right?
Yeah.
Catalyzing entire cultural movements.
Exactly. But it's more than just commissioning work. Patrons are builders of cultural foundations. They commission grand institutions. Think of the Hermitage Museum or the Getty Center. These are institutions born from an individual's vision, but they're designed to serve universal cultural needs. Their architectural legacy is this vital dialogue between personal taste and public benefit.
I have to challenge that a bit, though. Isn't calling an oligarch a custodian sometimes just a brilliant PR move? How do we separate real cultural investment from glorified tax write-offs or vanity projects?
That differentiation, I think, lies in the investment in infrastructure. True custodians fund the supporting ecosystem. They finance the climate-controlled facilities for archivists. They establish research centers for scholars. They fund educational programs to pass on traditional crafts to a new generation. They do it regardless of the economic return. They're creating these long-term ecosystems where tradition can not only survive, but actually innovate.
Okay, let's try to synthesize all of this. What we've seen today is that the enduring nature of human creativity transcends time, because it's constantly being interpreted and protected by this diverse chain of guardians.
It's a living force that evolves while staying true to its core essence.
And that demands such a delicate balance.
It does. The archivist's true accomplishment isn't just locking history away in a vault, it's ensuring its accessibility. A medieval manuscript behind glass is just an artifact if its wisdom remains out of reach. The challenge is making sure that historical depth can coexist with robust present-day involvement.
This whole journey shows that every form of heritage, whether it's written down or invisible, has to adapt to survive. We talked about how oral histories evolve with each retelling and how craftsmanship adapts to commercial pressure.
And this raises, I think, the ultimate provocative question for you to think about. In that balance between ensuring the economic viability of a tradition like a pottery workshop having to scale for the market and preserving its foundational authenticity, the slow, non-scalable process of the master, where does the line of true cultural preservation actually lie? At what point does adaptation become dilution?